Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. Today is Tuesday, June 4th, and for today's show we are going to be continuing the dialogue surrounding the NBA Finals. And today I want to talk about what is at stake for a couple of the star players in this series in both Jayson Tatum and Kyrie Irving, starting with the Celtics. They've been on the brink of winning a championship for what feels like the entirety of Tatum's career up to this point, and this is their best opportunity yet, and there is going to be lots of pressure surrounding Tatum and the Celtics. So I want to dive into sort of the reactions of what is going to take place if the Celtics were to get upset in this series. So I want to dive into that, as well as the timeline that took place for Kyrie Irving to become a villain in the eyes of a lot of Boston Celtics fans, whether or not that's still justified, and what it would mean for him with a win or loss against his former team. Additionally, we got news this morning that Kristaps Porzingis is expected to play in Game 1 in this series, so talk about the impact that he will have on this series and what it could mean in the Celtics' favor. And then in the final parts of the show, we're going to be talking about the report that Brandon Ingram is not expected to get a max contract extension for the New Orleans Pelicans, what that could mean for his future with the organization, and what their different options are as they approach the offseason. And then finally, going to be talking about the MLB deciding to place a lifetime ban on the San Diego Padres infielder Tucupita Marcano, and the allegations surrounding him in regards to betting on his own team, as we continue to see more and more stories pop up about the implications of betting, and with it being so much more normalized from a national perspective, we're seeing athletes get caught more frequently and discuss the ramifications there. But before we dive into everything, just want to remind everyone to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can go to gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a comment, it will pop up on the screen for all of our viewers to see as well. Anything would be greatly appreciated on that end. The Boston Celtics, though, are one of the premier teams in the NBA, one of the premier franchises, really, of course, with their 17 titles playing in a big market. And it has been understood that for a number of years now, the Celtics have had a playoff contending team. Now, they have almost been doomed a little bit by the fact that they were probably running a little bit ahead of schedule when things first started in this Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown era, but they have been to the conference finals in 6 of the 8 last seasons, are now getting their second chance in the NBA Finals. Last time they came short against the dynasty of the Golden State Warriors, obviously an older version of that crew, but still a very established core. And now the Celtics are the ones who have the upper hand in terms of postseason experience. Now, Kyrie Irving for the Mavericks does have a ring of his own, but outside of him, this is a much more youthful Mavericks team that Luka Doncic has been to the conference finals before, but other than that, there isn't a ton of playoff experience. And the Celtics still haven't brought the championship home yet, but they've at least been to the finals. They've been in a number of these deep postseason runs, and now seems like it is the opportunity for them to clinch it. Yesterday, when we looked at the odds, the Celtics were minus 210 favorites on DraftKings. We'll see with the report that came out this morning for Kristaps Porzingis being cleared to play Game 1, whether or not we've seen any action. So stick with us and we will dive more into that as the show goes on. But I want to talk about what happens if the Celtics do end up losing this finals, because there is a very real chance that specifically Luka Doncic, who has been on this meteoric rise through the beginning of his career, making 5 first-team All-NBAs in his first 6 seasons, he's been massively accomplished. And for as much as everybody has sort of talked about Anthony Edwards as this young star that's overachieving, Luka may have been the story all along of that young player, just 25 years old, of being the one to sort of surpass what our usual expectations are for a career timeline. It's very much on the table. The Mavericks are a good team. A number of people are picking them nationally. I don't have my official pick out yet, but I am definitely leaning with the Celtics in this series. So I want to talk about what is going to happen to the Celtics if they end up losing this finals. And obviously, the number one thing that is going to take place, the storyline that will be on ESPN the day after, is Jayson Tatum and how he may not be good enough. And, we'll still have to see sort of if they were to lose, again, talking hypothetically here, but depending on how he plays, more likely than not, he is going to be the main culprit in the eyes of a lot of media companies as to why the Celtics didn't win. And I want to sort of dive into Tatum because he has already been getting killed for the postseason run that the Celtics have had so far, despite the fact that what he is doing is on a pretty significant historical level. So if you look at his playoff stats as a whole, 26 points per game, 10.4 rebounds per game, and 5.9 assists per game, all of which lead the Celtics throughout the postseason so far. He is one of 6 players in NBA history to actually lead his team in all of those categories in a trip to the finals. Now, he is set to play one of those other players. Like I mentioned, Luka Doncic has been tremendous for the Mavericks, even despite dealing with the injuries and coming out of the tougher Western Conference. But again, 6 players to ever do this. It's Tatum and Luka, and then it is LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, Tim Duncan, and Jason Kidd, all Hall of Famers there. Tatum is also one of 5 players in the last 50 years to average 25 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, and 5 assists per game, leading into an NBA Finals. Him, LeBron once again, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic, and Larry Bird. So just a couple sort of groupings of statistics. I know that those are, typically known as Sports Center stats, where they can be cherry-picked at times, but at least when you look at the group of company that he's in, every one of those makes sense. For the most part, I was definitely surprised to see that Kidd led his team in rebounding in 2002, I believe the season was, that he did so. But, the point being, Tatum is in some elite company in more than one ways. And on that note as well, he has scored 2,600 points in the postseason throughout his career already. In terms of players to score the most amount of playoff points before turning 27 years old, Jayson Tatum is second all-time, only behind Kobe Bryant, who scored 2,694. Meaning Tatum needs just 94 points in this finals to become the all-time postseason leading scorer before 27 years old. And listen, I know 27 is a little bit of a strange cutoff, but Tatum is 26 right now. He is far ahead of schedule right now. Luka's also sort of on that career trajectory as well. He has this playoffs and next as well, so Tatum could end up passing, or Doncic could end up passing Tatum in that same category. But again, Luka is a generational talent, and Tatum, he has been in the postseason every year in his career, and there's this narrative that sort of surrounds him about him being drafted into a super team that I don't want to dive into. As a Celtics fan, I lived it, and I definitely would not say that the Celtics were a super team by any means through the first handful of years. Maybe a failed super team, but not at his fault, and there were a lot of flaws in all of those rosters, and Tatum has just been the epitome of reliable for the Celtics all the way through, is yet to miss a playoff game, which, listen, we know the NBA playoffs in comparison to the other postseasons in American sports. Seems like in the NBA, given that you only have 5 players on the court at a time, injuries become such an important factor. And Tatum has been extremely durable. And that's something that, LeBron James, for the majority of his career, and listen, not comparing the two players by any means, but one of the best things about LeBron was that he was an Iron Man through the first, 10 plus years of his career. It really wasn't until that first year with LA in 2018 that he sort of started experiencing any type of serious injuries. But Tatum has been extremely available for the Celtics throughout his career and has helped lead them to these conference finals appearances and such. But obviously, he has taken on a much larger role. And now that the Celtics do have this developed, call him a super team if you want now. I feel like that term gets tossed around so loosely all the time now. But the Celtics have tons more talent surrounding them, to the point where when you look at comparison of 2022, when they made the finals then, to this year, we have seen a massive difference in the role that Tatum has been asked, where in 2022, he was being asked a lot to sort of put the team on his back and carry them all the way throughout. And we saw, especially by the end of that conference finals, I think against Miami and then into the finals, Tatum was gassed. And listen, at that point, Tatum was, I don't know, if I can try and remember off the top of my head, maybe 24 years old during that postseason run. It was his age 23 season, may have turned 24 by the time the finals came around. But that is a lot to ask of a 23-year-old. Now, you're still young, so you understand that you should have the legs under you. But I think that we saw this a little bit with Anthony Edwards when he just went through his postseason run this playoffs, where it caught up to him by the end, and especially that he was being tasked with the defensive assignments on the other end. It's as much as you would think that the younger players would benefit more from it, it's a little bit of that wake-up call of what it feels like to truly be in a deep playoff run. And I think that Tatum, in comparison to 2022, is now elevating his game, you could say peaking at the right time through this postseason, where granted, also you look at the team they played Indiana, where it was very easy for not just the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, but teams all season long to get to the paint against the Pacers. But even still, we saw Tatum have his most efficient series of the postseason so far. The big thing with him right now, because I don't think that he really has a flaw in his game, but the three-point shooting is something that is definitely looked at because he chooses to shoot as many threes as he does. And ultimately, that's something that he's going to sort of need in his arsenal. I would say the Celtics are going to need to hit their three-pointers in order to overcome the fact that Dallas has an incredible interior defense. But Tatum is going to be the number one candidate to be slandered by the media and by NBA fans if the Celtics come up short. And maybe that will be a conversation that we have to have in terms of Tatum. He is viewed, for the most part, as a top 10 player. A lot of people say he's closer to 10 than 5. I'm not here to necessarily make that argument right now, but we have seen in the past the fact that the best, player in the series in the finals does happen to win more times than not. But Luka should be the best player in the final series coming up. So for Tatum, it's going to be definitely a point of contention for him to make sure that he capitalizes, and it won't all fall on him, but he is obviously going to be the number one person that is pointed to. So ultimately, this whole conversation surrounding the Boston Celtics and what happens to them if they lose in the finals, I bring up all this backstory behind Jayson Tatum because he's accomplished a ton already, and the Celtics are on a good path considering Tatum isn't even 27 years old yet, and he's their best player, and they've made the finals in 2 of the past 3 seasons. But, you know, there are going to be people who will be critical of them, and I'm not saying completely for unjustified reasons, but that's where when you look at the Celtics salary cap and the amount of talent that they have locked up under contract for the next handful of years, through 2024-25, they have their top, call it 7 rotational players already under contract in Tatum, Brown, Drew, Derek White, Al Horford, Kristaps Porzingis, even Peyton Pritchard. So they have a great core that is going to last them at least the next couple years, and I don't think that the Celtics should look to shake anything up, but that is obviously going to be a massive question mark surrounding the Celtics if they do end up coming short. But again, we have some time to get to before the Celtics even play their first game, let alone potentially lose the series. So just wanted to sort of talk on some of the media questions surrounding the Celtics team, but we are going to be moving on to the Dallas side of this, and I want to talk about Kyrie Irving and the history that he has with the Boston Celtics. Of course, used to be on the team, the timeline and order of events that took place to make Kyrie a villain in the eyes of a lot of Celtics fans, how that's going to play out in this finals, and what is sort of at stake for Kyrie Irving as well. So we are going to dive into all of that, but first, taking a quick break, we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are now going to be running through the order of events that took place with Kyrie Irving that led to him being this villainous character in the eyes of a lot of Celtics fans. I know it's been a handful of years, and I would say that the more mature Celtics fans are a little bit more forgiving of everything that went down. It seems like it was a little bit, ultimately, the departure of Kyrie and free agency was better for both parties, where Kyrie was able to sort of go on his own journey that led him to the point where he is this legitimate leader, not sort of the wanting to be veteran leadership with the Celtics organization that ended up being a mess, and the younger players for the Celtics that Kyrie didn't necessarily seem to be meshing with great were able to fully develop. So going all the way back to August of 2017, the Boston Celtics decided to trade for Kyrie from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Kyrie had asked out of Cleveland after seeming to be frustrated with being that second fiddle behind LeBron James, and the Celtics, coming off of an Eastern Conference Finals loss to the Cavaliers, in which they were without their starting point guard in Isaiah Thomas, who is beloved by Celtics fans. For me personally, as somebody who didn't get to really experience the 2008 title, Isaiah Thomas is my favorite Celtic of all time. And, it was because the way that he was able to sort of jumpstart the organization and their rebuild and such, and put them back in postseason contention, was something that was really fun to see Isaiah Thomas sort of start it from the ground up and help lead them to a conference finals appearance. But all that being said, Thomas was missing that Eastern Conference Finals with a hip injury. It's clear that he was never the same after that. And it was kind of a no-brainer for the Celtics, moving Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, Ante Zizic, and a first-round pick. Now, the first-round pick was Colin Sexton. It was the 8th overall pick, so there was some value there. But for the Celtics, they felt like they were in a position where they could steal the number 2 player from their biggest rival in the Eastern Conference and potentially sort of push their chips in to become real competitors, not to mention the fact that they already had the number 1 overall pick in the 2017 draft, which ended up being Jayson Tatum. So they didn't need all of these extra young pieces. They were trying to begin their ascension to be NBA Finals contenders. And I think the fact that the Celtics were a little bit ahead of schedule made it seem that Kyrie's leadership could be what takes them over the top. And the Celtics doubled down on the idea that they were potential finals contenders when they also signed Gordon Hayward in the offseason. So that first season, 2017-18, this was Tatum's rookie year. Gordon Hayward, of course, goes down with the season-ending injury in the first few minutes of that game. So that was incredibly tragic to see. But even still, Kyrie was the number 1 option, averaged over 24 points per game, led the Celtics to a 55-27 record. But Kyrie did end up missing the final month of the regular season with a knee injury and underwent surgery that kept him out for the remainder of the postseason. Even then, though, the Celtics were able to make it to the conference finals once again, push the Cavaliers to Game 7, backed behind a younger Jayson Tatum, and still it felt like the future was extremely bright for the Celtics. LeBron took over down the stretch of that game, but they went toe-to-toe with LeBron James. That was obviously one of the weaker teams in LeBron's history with the Cavaliers, but still for the Celtics, who were relying a lot on this youth talent, a massive success for them, and they felt like going into the next season with a healthy Kyrie Irving, that would be enough to again put them over the top. Which brings on October 2018. Kyrie, before the season, sort of went to a season ticket holder event for the Boston Celtics, and he gave the speech that sort of goes down in Celtics infamy, that he said, "If you guys will have me back, I plan on re-signing here next year." And the crowd went wild, and the expectation was that this version of the Celtics with Kyrie Irving were going to go on to win championships, and the regular season immediately did not live up to the fantasy standards that were sort of being thrown out there during the offseason, because LeBron James was finally out of the Eastern Conference. He had just signed with the Lakers. The Celtics looked like they were ready to take this next step and that their top competitor was gone, but they were just sort of a middling team throughout the year. They finished 49-33 as the 4 seed throughout the season. Kyrie was speaking up at times with the media. It was clear that he was being very contentious with the Boston media, didn't appreciate a lot of the questions that were thrown out there, and he also had concerns with his young teammates and whether or not they were actually buying into the product of trying to contend. He felt like, and I do think that this is legitimate, that Kyrie was possibly a little bit arrogant at this time, thinking that he was Kyrie. It did feel like, and I have no doubt that he's an intelligent person, but he had a little bit of the smartest person in the room syndrome during his early years, especially coming off of his championship, and he thought that he 100% knew what was right. So he throws his teammates under the bus a number of times, and there is definitely a case to be made that some of the Celtics young players weren't fully buying in to the extent that they needed to. The chemistry was all off that season as a whole. They kind of suffered from having too many guys. Jaylen Brown has talked about it since, how he felt like he wasn't satisfied with his role that season. He was sort of buried coming off of the bench. Marcus Morris was a good player at the time. And, Marcus Morris, when he gets hot, he gets really hot. We saw that in, Game 5, I believe, of the Cavs-Celtics series. But, he was sort of taking away from Jaylen Brown's minutes, and he didn't like that. Gordon Hayward had returned from injury, definitely didn't look like himself, maybe didn't deserve to get the amount of playing time that he did, but Brad Stevens was trying to work him back into the mix of things, and like I mentioned, Jaylen Brown was just buried a little bit, and there was clearly a growing rift between Kyrie and the rest of the locker room. Kyrie, before the All-Star break, sort of walked back his commitment a little bit in terms of whether or not he was going to re-sign with the Celtics. Said that he doesn't owe anybody anything, and then at the All-Star break, there are the videos that come out of him and Kevin Durant talking with one another, people speculating that that was them sort of planning on potentially linking up. Kyrie was really mad at the Boston media who was asking him about it, and he was getting worked up at the fact that the media was getting worked up over, one video, but it was obviously ended up being the case that Kyrie ends up deciding to, link up with Kevin Durant. They sign with the Nets in the offseason after the Celtics lose to the Bucks in the Eastern Conference semifinals. And in that series, it was pretty disastrous for Kyrie, where he averaged 20 points per game on 22% shooting splits, 3.6 turnovers per game. He went 4 of 18 in game 2. Talked about how he needs to be shooting more. And at that point, I don't think there were a lot of Celtics fans that really wanted him back. So he ends up moving on for Brooklyn, and he kind of bashes the Celtics some on the way out in the media himself. And once he gets to Brooklyn, he avoids a number of games against the Celtics. It was clear there was some animosity between him and the Celtics fans, and it was clear that once he did start playing, he stomped on the logo for the Celtics after Game 4 when the Celtics swept him and the Nets in the playoffs in 2022. That could have also been when the Nets beat the Celtics in the playoffs the next year. But, one way or another, Kyrie stepping on the Celtics logo. He flipped off some fans as well, which he recently talked about how he feels bad about. And there was the fan that threw the water bottle at him. So, again, extremely contentious afterwards as well. Now, again, I think that both the Celtics and Kyrie are in better places now that that divorce did take place. And Kyrie is going to get booed by a number of Celtics fans. I have a hard time imagining that Celtics fans are going to resist it. I do feel like the overall prevailing idea is he shouldn't be at least quite as hated within Celtics circles, but again, there are, and especially when we're talking about the Boston fan base, which can be a little bit unforgiving and obnoxious, there are going to be people who are going to be upset as a member of Celtics fandom. Again, as things currently stand, I don't really hold any ill will towards him. I think it'll be really sweet beating him, but that sports hatred doesn't necessarily exist, at least in my eyes, anymore. But we'll also have to see how he sort of conducts himself throughout the course of this series. He's been extremely composed the past couple months. we'll see what happens. I could also, he could make some sort of a comment that could set me off once again. So we will see how that all plays out. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section about this whole situation. Finally, we have this homecoming taking place on the biggest stage, so it's going to be a huge storyline. But we're going to be taking our next break, and when we come back on the other side, I want to dive into the reports that came out this morning about Kristaps Porzingis being cleared to play in Game 1 of the NBA Finals and how that could impact this series. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Earlier this morning, Shams Charania reported that Kristaps Porzingis is expected to play in Game 1 of the NBA Finals, which is definitely a relief. I feel like it should be, at least for NBA fans in general, because if you are a Celtics fan, you want to see him out there. If you are a Celtics hater, which I know there are a lot of them out there, it was going to be, I wouldn't say an excuse, but definitely a reason to not fully bury the Celtics if they were to lose this series. Kristaps Porzingis, I know that the Celtics have been able to cruise through the playoffs without him up to this point, but he is a massively important part of this Celtics team, and it's just good to see that he's going to be back in this one. Porzingis was an off-season pickup for the Celtics, of course, and it seemed like they were going to really need him through this postseason run. Lucky for them, the Eastern Conference playoffs shook out in a way that he wasn't really necessary. He went down with a calf injury in Game 4 of their first-round series against the Miami Heat and has been out since then. There has been some speculation that since then it's in large part been to the fact that the Celtics have been cruising and that he wasn't necessarily needed to win these series, but this is definitely a series I would say that the Celtics are really going to need him, because like I mentioned, the Dallas Mavericks have been an elite defense to close the regular season, and we've seen it in the postseason so far, and it stems from the platoon defenders I think that they have in the post with Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, and the rim protection that they have been able to bring. And what we have seen in a series such as, if you want to take both the Timberwolves and the Celtics out of this, or the Mavericks and the Celtics, that is the Timberwolves and Nuggets series, where the Timberwolves defense was elite against the Nuggets, and in large part it was because they were able to sort of hide their interior threat in Rudy Gobert on a non-shooter for the Nuggets in Aaron Gordon, and have him be this little bit of a roamer. And the Mavericks haven't necessarily had to deal with an elite three-point shooting big man up to this point in the postseason. And the thing is they've played a number of centers who can actually make teams pay from the three-point line, in both Chet Holmgren in the conference semifinals and Karl Anthony Towns in the conference finals. Neither one of them made them pay, and I think that both of those players got open looks, but were just unable to convert. Now, I said elite. Kristaps is a very good three-point shooter. He did have a down year from a three-point shooting perspective. Shot 37.5%, which we've seen him be better on a number of occasions, but he is still somebody that you absolutely have to respect. I believe the average depth of his three-pointers ranked among the top in the NBA in terms of he was taking some deep three-point shots, which means that the Mavericks are going to have to respect him on the outside. Al Horford, as much as he's had a couple really big three-point shooting performances in the closeout game against Cleveland, and then it was Game 3 against the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals, there were a number of times where these other teams were willing to give Al Horford shots, and that's something that, especially when you're talking, Al Horford at this point, 38 years old, is somebody who I don't believe that the pressure of being on the road is going to get to him necessarily, but especially when you're on the road, maybe you sag off a little bit more and try and make Al Horford bury these shots, even though, Game 3 was on the road against Indiana. But, regardless, I think that the Celtics are going to do a better job of spacing out the Mavericks defense and maybe try and pull away that two-headed threat down low of Gafford and Lively, whoever is in at the time. So that's definitely a massive piece of how the Celtics are going to run their offense, is try and have Porzingis space out. But another part that I'm interested in, because the Mavericks, now that they have Maxi Kleber back as well, who is somebody that I think coming off of the bench, providing a little bit of a variety in the types of lineups that this Mavericks team can run with him either at the 4 or as a little bit of a smaller stretch 5. Adrian Wojnarowski, when he was first reporting on Maxi Kleber returning, that he could be somebody guarding Jayson Tatum in a lot of these moments. Now, I would have to imagine that if Kleber is going to be guarding Jayson Tatum any types of big minutes, that means they're probably going to run another big man alongside him as well, because Kristaps Porzingis otherwise should be able to, with his improved post-up game, even though I don't think he played great in that Miami Heat series other than Game 1, but in Game 1 what we did see and what we saw for a lot of the regular season as well, if you want to take a bigger sample size, is the fact that he does have an improved post-up game that can at least take advantage of some smaller defenders. And the Mavericks have some guys who are a little bit lengthier, a little bit stronger, even if they're not necessarily quite as tall. You look at PJ Washington, who's played some minutes at the 5 for the Mavericks through their postseason run, and Derek Jones, I don't know about that necessarily. I feel like he's probably going to be one of the ones that's asked to most guard Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum, but is still sort of interesting to see, again, what types of lineups the Mavericks are going to throw out there. And I do believe that it sort of centers around what are the Celtics going to get from Kristaps Porzingis. And we've been talking on the offensive side of things, defensively as well. I think it's going to be interesting looking at because with Al Horford on the court, and this is something that we talked about yesterday, Al has been targeted by Donovan Mitchell and Tyrese Halliburton specifically in the previous playoff runs of trying to put him in pick and roll situations and have these quick guards take advantage of them off of the dribble. Luka is not unathletic by any means, but he's a little bit more built. He's not quite as twitchy, you could say. So I think that Al is going to be, a little bit better suited to guard Luka than a Donovan Mitchell in particular, but still something that I could see Luka trying to attack. And Kristaps Porzingis, Luka can score on anybody. We already know that. But Porzingis has a little bit more of, at least that length, I think, that can have him. There's no good way to guard Luka, but I do think that Porzingis can play, somewhat of a role there. Additionally, be a little bit more of an impact as a roamer potentially if he does get opportunities sort of off the ball. It's going to be interesting to see the Celtics philosophy in terms of how much they want to guard up against some of those role players that have hit big shots this postseason. PJ Washington, Josh Green, Derrick Jones Jr., go down the list. They have hit some big shots, not at a tremendous clip in terms of efficiency. Derrick Jones is shooting like 40%, but only on 2.5 or so attempts per game. PJ Washington has had his ups and downs throughout the postseason, but even when he's struggling with efficiency, it feels like he buries all of the big shots for Dallas. A little Robert Horry-esque, but I think that there's just going to be a lot of moving pieces in this series, and Porzingis is going to play a very big role in that. Now, very briefly, I do want to sort of address the fact that Chandler Parsons was on a podcast the other day and talked about some of the animosity between, it's on the Run It Back show presented by FanDuel, and he said, quote, "Luka did not like playing with Porzingis. There is actual beef there." Luka, I believe it was just earlier today, gave a quote saying, "I've talked to Chandler Parsons maybe twice in my life. I don't know how he would know that. Me and KP have a good relationship." So Parsons was trying to stir the pot a little bit. He did play for the Mavericks, but he was gone by the time that Kristaps Porzingis was there, and I think he was actually gone as well by the time Luka was there. So, maybe he has some connections in Dallas, but not like that to the degree that he would know, Luka or Porzingis all that well. But just found that interesting. Maybe Luka was just shutting it down for the sake of not giving the Celtics any extra bulletin board material. But let me know your thoughts on that whole situation in the comments section. But let me know what you think that Kristaps Porzingis' impact could have on this series. We're going to be taking our next break here. We've done a lot of finals today, but there was another NBA story that came out yesterday about Brandon Ingram and the New Orleans Pelicans in terms of where they are at in their contract negotiations and what to expect this offseason. So we're going to be taking a quick break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to dive into that. Stick with us. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Next, we are going to be talking about Brandon Ingram and the New Orleans Pelicans. A report came out yesterday from William Giori, apologies if I mispronounced there, of The Athletic, reported on Monday that the Pelicans are unlikely to sign Brandon Ingram to a max contract. He's going to be eligible as he is entering the final season on his contract, and it is really interesting when you try and evaluate what Brandon Ingram is as an NBA talent, because of course he has been an all-star before and he's been the most improved player before. We have seen a lot of shining moments for him, but at the same time, I think that what you saw from him in the postseason this year is a little bit indicative of what his career as a whole has looked like at this point, where Brandon Ingram has very much struggled from the fact that injuries have been a massive part of his career storyline. And this past year, we saw him in the postseason really struggle. 14.3 points per game, 3.3 assists per game, and he shot 34.5% from the field, 25% from three. And every one of those stats were down from his regular season averages, where he was a 20-point per game scorer, averaging 5.7 assists, 5.1 rebounds, with much better efficiency. So, shout out Lou Dort. He had Brandon Ingram absolutely in jail. It's not easy to come back from a lower body injury in a moment like that and go up against a very physical, lengthy defender in Lou Dort. But it does sort of make me think, is it fair to say that he lost himself money with his postseason performance? I don't think so, because it's one of those things, and you have this conversation all the times when you talk about, if you want to say, LeBron's finals appearances, where LeBron is almost dinged for making the finals more times, but he didn't win. So ultimately, it's almost like, in the eyes of a lot of people, that is worse than not making the finals altogether, a la the MJ LeBron argument, which is not what we're talking about right now by any means. But ultimately here, for Brandon Ingram, he tried to stick it out with an injury. He came back during game 82 of the regular season for the Pelicans, and it was just clear that he was never really himself when he came back, and that was very indicative, I thought, during the play-in tournament game that the Pelicans played against the Lakers, where Brandon Ingram was on the bench for the majority of the fourth quarter as the Pelicans made this run where they had a lineup that did not include him and favored instead Trey Murphy III, who was playing excellent, which is why a lot of people were critical of head coach Willie Green when he decided to keep Ingram on the bench in that situation. I had no problem with it, really. Now, once Zion goes down with injury, maybe you want to bring in Brandon Ingram instead of CJ McCollum, who then got hunted defensively. But, ultimately it was just clear that Brandon Ingram was not himself at that point, and then they go into this playoff series against a young, hungry Thunder team, and he gets the number one matchup, especially with Zion out for the postseason. So he ended up really struggling. So ultimately, I don't think that the playoffs performance necessarily cost him money, but I do feel like the fact that, as I talk about all these injuries, I think that's the more overarching concern with Brandon Ingram, where when you look at his missed games since joining the New Orleans Pelicans, last year he actually played the most amount of games that he has since his rookie year, where he played 64 games, but he missed 18. Again, since joining the Pelicans, he's missed 18, 37, 27, 11, and 10 over the course of these years. He's missed 103 out of 390 regular season games for the Pelicans since joining them. That is obviously taking into account the fact that both the 2019-20 and 2021 seasons were both COVID years, but it goes beyond that as well, because he also missed 30 games in 2018-19 with the Lakers and 23 games in 2017-18. So again, injuries are just a massive part of the story behind Brandon Ingram, who has been an all-star, who has averaged, 23 plus points per game 3 times in his career up to this point. And it does just feel like I can't blame the Pelicans by any means for having a little bit of concern in terms of giving him this max money, especially when they have a ton of money already locked up in Zion Williamson for the near future, and he is another player who they can't necessarily fully trust to stay healthy. So the Pelicans are at a weird point here where they were able to get Brandon Ingram out of that trade with the Lakers for Anthony Davis, and he is, in terms of, the role players that they traded for from LA, he's kind of the last piece standing, and I'm sure the Pelicans would like to make it work for him, but at the same time, again, your priority should probably be on Zion. I think that the Pelicans are in the realm of being able to sort of maybe have a sneaky season like the Timberwolves had this past year, in terms of having some really good regular season success and maybe winning a playoff round or two. But it's interesting here because Brandon Ingram has just played his age 26 season, and we've already seen these injuries. You would think that there is another level that he can eventually go to, but is he a max player? And during this CBA where there's the second apron and such, it is very risky to sort of pour that much money into him as well. If you want to look at what is coming for the Pelicans in free agency, Jonas Valanciunas, Najee Marshall, and Cody Zeller are the three upcoming free agents that got significant time for them, so it's not like they are losing all too much in this offseason, but it'll be interesting to see. I think there's a very real chance that another team could look to invest into Brandon Ingram. When we talked the other week about what the Hawks could do with their unique situation of getting the number 1 overall pick, could they potentially look to make a move for Brandon Ingram as well? There's a whole lot sort of going on in all of that. So we're going to definitely be monitoring this going forward. But as for now, let me know your predictions in the comments section. We're going to be taking our next break, though. And when we come back on the other side, going to be shifting away from the NBA because we had some breaking news regarding an MLB player getting banned for life. The second such instance that we've seen in sports this past calendar year of somebody receiving a lifetime ban for gambling. So we will be back after this quick break with all of the details surrounding this. Stick with us and we will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where this morning we got news that the MLB is placing a lifetime ban on San Diego Padres infielder Tucupita Marcano. Apologies there for the pronunciation, but Marcano has played a total of 149 regular season games in the MLB since 2021. He played 25 games with the Padres that season, and then he's played in 124 games with the Pirates over the past couple years. He is currently with the Padres once again. I believe he has been injured, dealing with an IL stint, but he was supposed to come back for the Padres, and instead he is never going to appear in another MLB game again. So what did he do? The LA Times reported that Marcano made 387 bets on baseball games over the past year or so, including 25 on the Pirates when he was with the organization. Now, at the time that these bets were placed, he was on the injured list, so he couldn't directly impact the games, but betting on any MLB game as a player is against league rules, and it only becomes that much easier of a decision for the league when it is betting on your own team. So ultimately, just a really, and I said this with Jonte Porter as well, who we're going to get into briefly, it's just a boneheaded move, I think, for these athletes to be risking their careers on betting. And I know that there are actually a number of people out there who think that the players should be able to because the league benefits from these sponsorships and such, but all of that money eventually trickles back down into the players' pockets anyways, these sponsorship deals. So just for the time being that you are in the league, just don't bet on the games. It's an incredibly easy solution, and it seems like we are getting more and more situations where these players can't get out of their own ways. And it was interesting too that the league put out a statement that Marcano only won 4.3% of his bets, which just does further go to prove how addictive gambling can be, because Marcano, according to spotrac.com, was set to make over $276,000 this season with the Padres. And now he is throwing that away and other future hundreds of thousands of dollars for just being on an MLB roster to play this sort of risky game of gambling and lose over 95% of the time. So it's just a ridiculously stupid thing to do if you are an athlete in these situations. And again, I struggle a little bit to find sympathy when the excuse is just that you want to participate in this vice. And, there's just no point for the 10 years that you are actually in the league or so. Just don't do it. So ridiculous, but he wasn't the only one that was caught gambling in all of this. There were 4 other players that have been suspended for a year because of this. Jay Groom, who is a pitcher for the Padres, Michael Kelly, pitcher for the Athletics, Jose Rodriguez, an infielder for the Phillies, and Andrew Saalfrank, a pitcher for the Diamondbacks. All of them are currently in the minor leagues, so nothing necessarily all too drastic in terms of this season ramifications. Groom was a former first-round pick by the Red Sox in 2016. Saalfrank, you may recognize, he made some appearances for the Diamondbacks in their postseason run last year, where he ended up pitching, 5+ innings. I want to say it was 5 2/3 innings for the Diamondbacks throughout their World Series runner-up run, and he even got 2 1/3 innings in the World Series. The early reporting around this is that the players have not bet on their own teams, which is why their punishments aren't quite as drastic. Still just as stupid to get caught up in all of this, but this adds to a number of different betting stories that we have seen by professional athletes and those sort of adjacent as well, where we had in baseball Ippei Mitsuhara, the former interpreter of Shohei Ohtani. He was caught stealing millions of dollars from Ohtani to use to gamble. The MLB actually did just close their investigation into Ohtani, and Mitsuhara has already pleaded guilty to those charges and such. So I know that there were some conspiracy theorists who were maybe hanging on there about the cover-up for Ohtani, but I think for the most part that is officially behind us. But we also saw Jonte Porter, who I just alluded to as well. He was on the Toronto Raptors on a 2-way contract where he was still making some decent money for himself as well, a few hundreds of thousands of dollars. I want to say it was something along the lines of $700K, and he got banned from the NBA for life because he was betting on basketball games, and he is currently, I still think, undergoing investigation for the fact that he was advising others close to him to bet on his prop bets, and he was skewing the results some. So all of this is just sort of a messy situation, goes to show how much of a risk that it is trying to participate in these activities. And listen, they are legal under the majority of state laws, gambling that is, but at the same time, in order to uphold the integrity of these leagues, they need to make sure that there is no funny business going on. And the easiest way to do it is just say, while you are with us, do not bet on especially the sport itself. There is no need to dive into that. It can lead to some compromising situations, and the league needs to uphold its credibility. So ultimately, just a really stupid thing to do if you are Marcano in this situation. But I don't know, if you feel differently about the legalization of sports gambling and the ramifications it has on athletes who are getting involved with it, I would love to hear an argument as to why they should be allowed to. But again, ultimately, I do think that all of that sponsorship money does come back around for them in the long run, and it just, I don't see any excuse for it whatsoever. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section. That is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. We are live every 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern on weekdays, so we will be back tomorrow afternoon. Be sure to check us out then, and we will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that crazy.